There's a version of me that I'm not particularly proud of. He'd wake up in the morning and reach for his phone before his eyes had even fully adjusted to the light. He'd scroll, not looking for anything specific, just scrolling, letting the feed pull him along like a current he hadn't chosen to swim in. Hours would pass. He'd barely notice. And then there was the eating. I used to snack incessantly, to my heart's desire, not because I was hungry, more like because something was always within reach, and reaching felt easier than sitting with whatever I was actually feeling. Chips, something sweet, something salty after the sweet. It was a loop I didn't examine too closely, because examining it would have meant admitting something uncomfortable, that I was using consumption as a substitute for presence. The scrolling and the snacking weren't really separate things. They were the same impulse wearing different clothes. Fill the moment, dull the edge. Don't let stillness get too loud. And for a while, it worked. Sort of. The way a painkiller works. It addresses the symptom while the actual problem quietly deepens underneath. Then one day, something shifted. Not dramatically. There was no rock-bottom moment, no single wake-up call. It was more like a slow accumulation of small disappointments in myself. I would eat until I started noticing that I gained weight, disappointing myself from being a non-stop eater, not knowing when to stop, just eating for comfort all the time. And the non-stop scrolling through feeds made me worn out, not paying attention to my body's need to take a break from it. I was tired in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. So I made a decision, and I want to be clear about something. It wasn't a half-hearted one. I've tried those. They don't hold. This had to be done with true intention, not willpower for its own sake, not discipline as punishment, but a genuine, considered choice to live differently. I stopped snacking compulsively. I started watching what I ate, not obsessively, but consciously. I gave my body the respect of actually listening to it instead of overriding it with noise. And something unexpected happened. When I finally ate something truly delicious, it tasted extra delicious because I hadn't been numbing my palate with junk food all day. When I sat down to watch a film, I was actually there for it because my subconscious wasn't burnt out from hours of passive content consumption. Pleasure returned. Real pleasure. The kind that doesn't leave you feeling empty an hour later. But here's the part I didn't anticipate. The discipline didn't stay contained. Once I pulled that one thread, other things started to loosen and rearrange. I found myself sleeping better and waking up at reasonable hours rather than oversleeping into the afternoon. I started cleaning my space more consistently, staying on top of tasks that used to pile up, not because I forced myself, but because the mental and physical fog that had been sitting over everything had started to lift. It turns out that when you stop outsourcing your comfort to cheap stimulation, something quieter and more reliable moves in to take its place. Call it clarity, call it self-respect, call it whatever you want. I call it enough. The art of knowing when you have enough, when you've had enough, when enough is actually more than plenty. And I wonder, what is the one thing in your life right now that you keep reaching for, not because you need it, but because you haven't yet learned to sit with the silence it's filling? Here's something nobody really tells you. The difficulty you feel when you try to stop scrolling, stop snacking, stop reaching for the next thing, that's not personal failing. That's not weakness. That's engineering. Somewhere in a room that looks nothing like your living room, people with advanced degrees in behavioral psychology and neuroscience sat down with a very specific brief. Keep them engaged as long as possible. Keep them coming back. Make the leaving feel like a loss. They succeeded. We live inside systems that were architected deliberately, methodically, around the most exploitable features of the human brain. The variable reward loop, the social validation trigger, the fear of missing out. These aren't accidents of the digital age. They are products. Refined, tested, optimized through billions of data points collected from billions of people who had no idea they were the experiment. Your attention is the commodity. Your impulse is the inventory. Your restlessness is the engine. Think about what it means to live in an era of infinite supply. For most of human history, scarcity was the default condition of life. You ate what you could find. You consumed what was available. The brain evolved powerful craving mechanisms precisely because resources were limited and survival depended on taking what you could when you could get it. And then, almost overnight in evolutionary terms, scarcity evaporated. Infinite content, infinite food options, infinite stimulation available at any hour, delivered directly into your palm. The craving mechanisms didn't disappear. They just found themselves in an environment they were never designed for, like a fire alarm wired to go off not in emergencies, but continuously because someone figured out it could be triggered on demand. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls our era the burnout society, not a society that overworks us through external coercion, but one that seduces us into depleting ourselves willingly. We don't have taskmasters anymore. We have feeds. We have notifications. We have the quiet tyranny of infinite choice that somehow always leaves us wanting more of something we can't quite name. This is the architecture of modern hunger. And the most elegant and perhaps most sinister part of it is that it mimics the feeling of freedom. Nobody forces you to scroll. Nobody holds a chip to your mouth. The cage has no visible bars. It's built from dopamine and design, from frictionless interfaces and perfectly calibrated novelty. You walk in willingly every time. You leave feeling vaguely less than when you arrived. And you come back anyway, because that's what it was built to do. Now, I'm not saying this to make you feel like a victim. The opposite, actually. Because once you see the architecture, you can start making choices that are genuinely yours. Not reactions, not reflexes, not the behavior of someone who has been successfully optimized by a system that profits from their distraction. Real freedom, the quiet, unglamorous, deeply satisfying kind, starts not with willpower, but with awareness. With the moment you look at the structure that was built around you and decide, consciously, that you'd like to build something different inside yourself instead. That's not a small thing in the context of the world we're living in. That might actually be one of the most radical acts available to an ordinary person. To simply opt out. Not with anger, not with some dramatic gesture, just quietly, deliberately choosing presence over stimulation. Choosing enough over more. Choosing yourself over the algorithm that was designed to replace you. And I'm curious, when you look at your own daily life, can you identify the specific architecture around you? The structures, the habits, the environments that were built by someone else to keep you consuming? And more importantly, have you ever tried to name them out loud?
Growing up, I always wanted to be a writer. Not in a vague, romantic, someday maybe kind of way. In a specific, urgent, this is what I am kind of way. I loved writing poems, short stories, and short novels. I loved the feeling of a thought taking shape on a page, the way language could catch something interior and hold it still long enough to actually look at it. That felt like a superpower to me. It still does. But life has a way of rerouting you. Not dramatically, usually, just gradually. The competition was rough, and life had me go down a more conventional path of finding a day job in the meantime. And the in the meantime stretched into years, then more years. And somewhere inside all that, the writer in me went quiet. Not gone. I don't think that part of a person ever fully leaves. Just quiet. Suppressed, I guess is the honest word. I suppressed my creative side over the years to focus on my day job. And that suppression has a cost that I didn't fully account for at the time. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's more like a low-level hum of something unfinished, a sense that the version of you moving through the world is missing a layer, that you're operating with less than you have available. It wasn't until recently that I finally decided to open up and embrace my creative side again. And that decision, which felt small when I made it, just a commitment to write things down, to stop editing myself before I even began, turned out to be one of the most consequential things I've done for myself in years. I started writing my thoughts down prolifically, organizing them on a mind map, expanding on ideas that I wanted to explore for myself, not for an audience, not for publication, just for the act of thinking more clearly than I could do inside my own head. And I can't say how beneficial this has been for me just in the past year. The changes aren't the ones I expected. I didn't suddenly produce a masterwork. I didn't resolve everything. What happened was quieter and more useful than that. I have better clarity over my life perspectives now. My awareness is heightened. I feel sharper, more focused, more objective about the things I'm actually looking at versus the stories I was telling myself about them. There's something that writing does to a thought that thinking alone can't replicate. When a thought lives only inside your head, it can loop endlessly, morph, contradict itself, dissolve before you've properly examined it. When you put it on a page, it becomes something you can actually see, something external, something you can argue with, build on, or let go of because you finally finished having it. And the more that I create, the more that I think about things that I want to improve in my life, the more things come to me. That's the part that surprised me most. I expected writing to help me organize what I already knew. I didn't expect it to generate new territory entirely, but it does, consistently. The act of articulating one idea seems to create the conditions for the next one to arrive. What I realized from this practice is that it can take time to start small with little ideas written, but through time, they can culminate to something larger. That's not just true of writing, that's true of anything worth building. The writer I always wanted to be didn't disappear. He was just waiting for me to pick the pen back up. So I want to ask you, is there a version of yourself you set aside to be practical, to be responsible, to survive? And what would it actually cost you to let that part of yourself back in?
There's a version of you that existed before the compromises, before the practical decisions, before the day job became the identity, before the years accumulated their expectations and obligations and comfortable routines that slowly, without any single dramatic moment, became the whole shape of a life. That version didn't disappear. You didn't lose it the way you lose keys or a phone. It's more like you set it down somewhere safe and then got very busy and then one day realized you couldn't quite remember where you'd put it. I've been thinking a lot about identity lately, not in an abstract philosophical way, but in a very personal, very immediate way, about who I decided I was at some point. Reliable, practical, someone who shows up and does what needs to be done, and how quietly that decision crowded out some other things I also was, things that didn't fit the version I was performing for the world. The writer, the creative, the person who wanted to make something that didn't exist before he made it. I set that part down, carefully, with the full intention of picking it back up when things settled, when there was more time, when the conditions were right. The conditions were never right. And what I didn't understand then, what I understand now with a clarity that's almost uncomfortable, is that suppressing a genuine part of yourself doesn't make you more productive or more focused or more adult. It makes you less present, less energized, less fully inhabited. You walk around as a partial version of yourself, and after a while, you stop noticing the parts that are missing because the absence becomes familiar. Reclaiming the creative side of myself has done something to the rest of my life that I didn't anticipate. It hasn't just improved the writing, it's improved everything adjacent to it. The clarity I mentioned, the sharpness, the heightened awareness, I don't think that's just what writing does. I think that's what happens when you stop spending energy on the low-level suppression, when you stop maintaining the gap between who you are and who you're allowing yourself to be. That maintenance costs something. It costs it quietly, invisibly, all the time. And when you stop paying it, that energy goes somewhere else. It goes into seeing things more clearly, into caring more genuinely, into showing up to your own life with more of yourself actually present.
There's also something that happens to your relationship with time when you reclaim a neglected part of your identity. The days start to feel more like yours, less like something happening to you, and more like something you're actively inside of. Because you're not just existing within the structure of obligations, you're also building something, making something, leaving some evidence that you were here and that you had something to say. I think that's what the creative impulse actually is at its deepest level. Not ego, not ambition, just the very human need to make a mark, to translate the interior life into something external, to say, this is what it was like to be me in this time, thinking these thoughts, feeling these things. That impulse doesn't age out. It doesn't become less valid because decades passed what you were busy with other things. If anything, it becomes more urgent, more insistent. The longer it waited, the louder it speaks when you finally let it. The writer I always wanted to be isn't a younger version of me I'm trying to return to. He's a part of me I'm finally letting catch up. And what I want to ask you is this. What part of yourself have you been quietly maintaining a distance from? Not because it isn't real, but because somewhere along the way it stopped seeming practical. What would happen if you just let it back in?
Gratitude. It's one of those words that gets thrown around so much it starts to lose its texture. Gratitude journals, gratitude challenges, gratitude this, gratitude that. And somewhere in all that noise, the actual feeling of it, the real lived experience of stopping and genuinely appreciating something, gets buried under the performance of it. But I keep coming back to it. Not as a trend, not as a wellness exercise, as something that actually works. One practice that I love to perpetuate is keeping track of all the things that I'm grateful for. And I mean all of them. The obvious ones and the small ones, and the ones that seem almost too ordinary to mention. The coffee that was exactly right this morning. The fact that my body carried me through another day without complaint. The message from someone I hadn't heard from in a while. Who says we should be thankful for what we have on one day of the year? That always strikes me as a strange idea. That we designate a single Thursday in November to acknowledge abundance and then spend the other 364 days either taking things for granted or cataloging everything that's missing. It doesn't make much sense when you actually look at it. So, I don't do that. I keep it close. I keep it daily. And whenever I'm having a bad day, and there are bad days, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, it especially comes in handy to be able to just summon a thought. To pause mid-spiral and say to myself, I'm grateful for something. I'm grateful for my job. I'm grateful for my home, my family, and friends. Sometimes that's all it takes to shift the weight of a moment. Not to fix it, not to pretend it isn't heavy, just to remind yourself that the heaviness exists inside a life that also contains good things. That reframe is genuinely powerful, and it costs nothing. But here's the part that surprised me when I started paying attention to it. It's not only a spark of joy to be grateful, but to express my gratitude towards others. There's something that happens when you tell someone directly that you appreciate them, that a small thing they did mattered, that you noticed. I know that when people express gratitude towards me, even for the smallest favors, it gives me that little tiny spark of joy that uplifts my soul, that feels good. It's immediate, it's real. And it works in both directions simultaneously. The person giving the gratitude and the person receiving it both walk away carrying something warmer than they had before. Maybe it's reinforcing a bond. Maybe it's a reminder that we're actually seen by the people around us, which is something most of us are quietly hungry for all the time. And so I make sure to give it as freely as I want to receive it. Then there's the journal, which is its own thing entirely. I keep a personal gratitude journal, and what I've found is that writing it down changes the quality of the gratitude itself. It becomes more specific, more real. Not just a vague sense of thankfulness, but an actual inventory. Things I bought that brought me joy,
Gifts I've received, achievements that once felt impossible and now live quietly on a page as proof of what I'm capable of. Together, all of these things as a whole have a compounding effect on my joy. Reading back through old entries is one of the stranger and more moving experiences I've given myself, because you forget. You genuinely forget how much good has already happened. The journal remembers for you. And I want to ask you, if you were to sit down right now and write 3 things you're genuinely grateful for today, not the obvious answers, but the real ones, what would actually make the list?
I want to tell you about the actual practice, not the concept of it, the real, physical, slightly imperfect thing I actually do. Because I think there's a gap between how gratitude journaling gets described, this serene, beautifully lit ritual with a perfect pen and a lemon-covered notebook, and what it actually looks like in real life, which is messier, more spontaneous, and honestly more useful because of that. Mine started simply. A notebook, not a special one, just whatever I had nearby, and a loose commitment to myself that I would write things down when they occurred to me, not on a schedule, not with a format, just when something worth keeping surfaced and I didn't want to lose it. The first few entries were obvious, the big things: health, shelter, people I love, the kind of gratitude that's easy to access because it's large enough to see from a distance. And those things matter. Genuinely, they do. But they're also so large that they can start to feel abstract after a while, like reciting something you've memorized rather than feeling something real. So I went smaller. And that's when the practice actually came alive for me. I started writing down specific things, not just "I'm grateful for my home," but the exact quality of light in the room at a particular moment. Not just "I'm grateful for my friends," but the specific way one conversation left me feeling more like myself than I had in days. The things I bought that turned out to be exactly right. Gifts I received that I hadn't expected. Small achievements that nobody else would notice or care about, but that I knew meant something because I knew what it cost me to get there. The specificity is everything. Vague gratitude stays in your head. Specific gratitude lands somewhere deeper. And here's what I didn't anticipate when I started, reading it back. Going back through old entries is one of the stranger and more quietly moving experiences I've given myself, because you forget. That's the thing nobody tells you. You genuinely, completely forget how much good has already happened. Not just the difficult things you survived, though those are there too, but the small joys, the moments of unexpected beauty, the times something worked out better than you had any right to expect. The journal remembers all of it. Every entry is a small proof that the life you're living contains more than the hard parts. I've read back through pages from months ago and felt something I can only describe as gratitude for my past self, for the version of me that bothered to write it down, knowing that a future version would need the reminder. There's also something cumulative that happens over time that I find genuinely difficult to explain, but that feels very real. Each individual entry is small, a sentence, sometimes 2, a thing noticed, a moment captured, an achievement quietly acknowledged. But together, all of them, as a whole, they build into something that starts to feel like evidence. Evidence that despite everything, despite the hard days and the uncertainty and the noise, there is a through line of good things running underneath it all. That evidence matters more than I expected it to. It doesn't make the difficult things smaller, but it makes the whole picture more accurate, and accuracy, I've found, is its own form of comfort. Because most of us aren't living bad lives, we're just paying more attention to the parts that hurt than the parts that don't. The journal corrects that imbalance, slowly, entry by entry, one specific, real, worth-keeping thing at a time. So I want to ask you, if you started a gratitude journal tomorrow, not the polished version, just a notebook and a pen and the truth, what's the very first specific thing, not the obvious answer, but the real one, that you would actually write down?
time. It's the one thing nobody can make more of, the one currency that spends itself whether you're paying attention or not. And the older I get, the more I find myself thinking about it, not anxiously, not with dread, but with a kind of quiet philosophical curiosity that I didn't have when I was younger. As I grow older, I think a lot about the concept of time, sometimes philosophically, sometimes practically, and I've noticed those two modes of thinking about it aren't as separate as they sound. Philosophically, time is strange. It only moves in one direction, and yet it doesn't feel consistent. An hour of joy passes in what feels like minutes. An hour of waiting stretches into what feels like days. The same 60 seconds can contain an entire lifetime, or almost nothing at all, depending entirely on what you're doing inside of it. And then there's the deeper truth that I keep coming back to. You can't change the past. You only ever truly exist in the present moment. That's not a new idea. Every wisdom tradition in human history has said some version of it. But knowing something and actually feeling it are entirely different experiences. Actually landing in the present, not thinking about what happened yesterday or rehearsing tomorrow, is surprisingly rare and surprisingly hard. But it's the present moment that we have to enjoy, and decisions that we can make today that can lead to a better future. That tension, being fully here while also building towards something, is one I sit with constantly. It's not a contradiction, I've decided. It's just what it means to be a conscious creature moving through time with some intention about where you're headed. Then there's the practical side. Because all that philosophy is well and good, but time also has a very immediate, very personal relationship with my actual days. And I've had to develop real systems to manage it, not because I'm naturally disciplined, but because I've learned what happens when I'm not. My day-to-day activities have a micro-level relationship with time too. I like to set a lot of timers on things, activities. This might sound rigid on the surface, all these alarms and countdowns buzzing throughout the day, but that's not how it feels from the inside. It feels like structure that liberates rather than constrains. I have an array of timers that I set on my smartwatch and smartphone. They're gentle checkpoints rather than demands. One tells me how long to be sitting down at my desk before I should get up and walk around, because I've learned that my best thinking doesn't happen when I'm glued to a chair for 3 hours straight. Movement resets something in the mind that stillness slowly calcifies. There's also a timer that I use to take little breaks here and there throughout the day, small pauses where I step away from whatever I'm working on and just let the mind breathe for a moment. A few minutes of nothing. And I've noticed that what comes after those pauses is almost always better than what came before them. What I'm really doing with all these timers is treating time with respect, acknowledging that it's finite and that how I divide it matters, that my attention is not an unlimited resource, and that protecting it in small, practical, slightly obsessive ways is one of the most genuinely useful things I can do for myself. Time passes whether you're honoring it or not. The timers just help me make sure I'm on the right side of that equation more often than not. So I want to ask you, when you think about how your day actually unfolds, hour by hour, is time something that happens to you or something you're actively in a relationship with? There's a paradox I've had to make peace with. The things that feel most like freedom, the unstructured days, the open hours with no plan, no alarm, no obligation, those are often the days where the least happens, where the most time disappears, where I reach the evening feeling somehow both restless and exhausted, like I've been running without moving anywhere. And the days with structure, with timers, with intentional breaks, with a shape to them, those are the days that feel paradoxically more spacious, more mine. It took me a while to understand why that is, but I think I do now. When there's no structure, the mind doesn't rest. It hovers. It holds everything simultaneously, all the things that could be done, should be done, might be done, in a kind of low-level anxious suspension. It's not free, it's just unguided.
And unguided attention, I've found, has a way of sliding toward whatever is most stimulating rather than whatever is most meaningful. Structure doesn't take freedom away, it takes that hovering away. It says, right now, this. Just this. Everything else can wait. That's what my timers actually do for me. Not the obvious thing, not simply reminding me to stand up or take a break. The deeper thing. They divide time into containers. And when you're inside a container, you stop negotiating with yourself about what to do with it. The decision is already made. You just work. There's a concept I keep coming back to called decision fatigue. The idea that every choice you make costs something, depletes something, and that by the time you've spent a morning making dozens of small decisions about how to spend your time, you have less mental energy left for the actual work. The timers eliminate a whole category of those decisions. They run in the background so I don't have to. But the breaks are the part I underestimated for the longest time. I used to think of breaks as interruptions, as the enemy of momentum. I'd be deep in something and the timer would go off and I'd feel almost resentful. I was in it and now I have to stop. What I've learned is that what I thought was momentum was often just inertia. The two feel identical from the inside, but they're not the same thing at all. Momentum is generative. Inertia is just continuation, and the break is what reveals which one you're actually in. When I step away, even for 5 minutes, even just to stand in a different room and let the mind go quiet, something resets. The problem I was stuck on often loosens. The paragraph I couldn't finish sometimes arrives whole. Not always, but often enough that I've stopped resenting the timer and started trusting it. The rhythm I've settled into feels less like discipline and more like breathing. Work is the inhale. The exhale is the break. You can't only inhale. The body knows this. The mind needs to learn it. And what I've noticed over time is that the quality of the work inside the containers has quietly improved. Not because I'm trying harder, but because I'm arriving at each session more present, less depleted, less tangled in the residue of everything that came before. The timer goes off, I stop. I breathe. I return. And something about the returning, the small, deliberate act of choosing to come back, makes the work feel more like a choice and less like a sentence. That distinction matters more than it sounds. So I want to ask you, is there something in your own life where structure, real intentional structure, might actually give you more freedom than the open, unscheduled time you've been protecting? What would it look like to actually try it?